Ladies and gentlemen, ever wondered why this channel is called The Hawk and Friends? Then I upload a video of Vince Russo. No, he's not one of the friends, believe it or not. This was a whole plan of mine where we're going to showcase some of the new wrestling YouTube channel talent that's out there. I'm always on the lookout for more talent to add to the Brick to the Head brigade. And we tried out Brother Peace that one time on the main channel and people threatened to unsubscribe. Now I'm not looking for another situation like that. So what the plan is for this channel is we're going to give some new guys a chance, without the pressure of having 70,000 subscribers abusing them. I can take the abuse, I'm used to it, but others maybe not so. So what we're looking for here is constructive criticism, positive feedback, and just any advice, and let them know if you want to hear more from them on this channel. This is an open platform along with interviews. Now today the very first person to step on the channel is Skylar. He's made a video about superheroes. Now being a Hawk, I know nothing about superheroes, except that I know that I could beat up anyone I wanted to. Now all that said and done, let's give the new guy a chance to see how it goes. And if it blows, I'll punch you in the nose.
Greetings, true believers. I'm the Galaxy Guardian, completely inhuman, power cosmic holding, that's right, the Martian, Skylar Mars. If you've been a wrestling fan for about any amount of time, you've been told it's fake and not worth your time. But in tons of popular media, pro wrestling has been a topic since television became commonly owned in people's homes. So, I'm going to come swinging in to talk about all the crossover between pop culture and professional wrestling. This episode is very special, not just for being the pilot, but it's a chance to talk about both my passions in the same video, pro wrestling and comic books. Welcome to Cheap Pop Culture. Now, if I say superhero and wrestling in the same sentence, I guarantee wrestling fans will think of the Hurricane in his league. While Helms is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, we're not talking about him today, because if a non-wrestling fan hears me say superhero and wrestling in the same sentence, they think of Spider-Man and his battle with Bonesaw McGraw. While the wrestling scene from the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie is probably the most well-known wrestling scene from basically any movie ever made, Spider-Man and Marvel as a whole actually have a long-standing relationship with the sport of professional wrestling that goes back to the 1960s. Alright, enough introductions. My Martian senses are tingling, which can only mean one thing. A new YouTube video is afoot. Let's get into it. So one thing I actually learned about not too long before making this video is that Marvel actually has a canonical wrestling federation for superpowered pro wrestlers. The story goes as more and more people either gained or revealed they had superpowers. Human pro wrestlers, wrestling is a shoot in Marvel, felt it was unfair to fight superhumans. So a promoter by the name of Edward Garner created the Unlimited Class Wrestling Federation. They took a bunch of superhuman pro wrestlers and divided them into weight classes. Now, when you hear weight class, you think of it as fighters being divided by how much they weigh. However, in the UCWF, the weight classes are divided by how much they can lift. Literally by what measurement of super strength they have. This would basically mean that if the Hulk met a baby with relative strength to the Hulk, the baby would be in the same weight class as the Hulk. It's pretty ridiculous. A ton of your favorite Marvel characters, and plenty you may never have heard of, actually competed in the UCWF besides the Human Spider. So we'll get to him last, as I actually have quite a bit to say about him. In fact, he was the inspiration for this entire video. Thor, for example, after discovering Frigga was not his biological mother, I know, that still doesn't make any sense, after a meeting with the Eternals, fled to Mexico to fight luchadors. Deadpool has had a couple of bouts in the squared circle himself fairly recently. A character known as D-Man actually spent many years in the sport, although very little of it is actually covered in the comics. The Hulk legitimately fought Hulk Hogan for the right to call himself the Hulk. I am not making this up. Hulk Hogan did the J.O.B. clean to the Incredible Hulk. Bane from Batman obviously looks a lot like a luchador, so in the Batman 66 run, a sequel to the old Adam West show, they just went and made Bane a luchador. The actor who played Green Arrow, Stephen Amell, has actually done quite a bit of wrestling himself, and even made a whole TV show about it that is currently ongoing called Heels, which you can watch on Starz. Cody Rhodes actually was on the show Arrow. Superman got in on the action the same year Spider-Man originally did, except instead of fighting a made-up character, he fought actual wrestling legend Antonio Rocca. Many of us remember when Macho Man Randy Savage voiced a villain called Wrestler on Dial M for Monkey. Yes, he will also be featured more prominently later in this video. Other Marvel superheroes turned wrestlers, at least for one match, would include Captain America, Captain Marvel, Vance Astro, Marvel Boy, Icarus, Howard the Duck, and probably the single most successful superhero turned pro wrestler of all time, The Thing, from the Fantastic Four. Ben Grimm, aka The Thing, possibly the greatest character design artist Jack Kirby ever created, quit the Fantastic Four in the 80s. He went on a soul-searching journey trying different occupations and not quite finding himself. While working with a group called the Thunder Riders, who are a group of stunt motorcyclists, yes, The Thing was a stunt motorcyclist, like Evel Knievel. It's just, I love comic books. He spoke with his friend Vance Astro and admitted he was unhappy with his new group. Vance convinced The Thing to quit. The Thunder Riders are incredibly classy here, letting The Thing not only out of his contract, but allowing him to keep the custom motorcycle they built for him. The Thing and Vance Astro checked into a hotel where The Thing saw an advertisement for a pro wrestling challenge. Wrestling is not scripted in Marvel, I must state that again, for a cash prize. The Thing goes to try out, completing and excelling in multiple physical challenges. He is an obvious talent for the sport and is immediately signed. He's totally Parker Bordeaux. Promoter Ed Garner pays off The Thing's first opponent to let The Thing win. Seriously? In what universe does someone have to let The Thing win? Which ends up not really factoring into the actual match because our Rocky friend demolishes his first two opponents anyways. He then challenges a god-tier villain called the Beyonder to a match, someone The Thing hates more than anyone, and nearly murders him in the ring, causing the godlike being to leave on a stretcher. He takes a bit of time off to work on a movie full John Cena style before coming back, battering his buddy Vance Astro, and then fighting off a supervillain group of lady wrestlers called the Grapplers, one of which would later become the superhero Songbird. He goes his entire career totally undefeated. It's actually an incredible storyline if anyone is interested in reading it, and builds a lot of character for The Thing. If I may add, for some reason, the wrestling parts, which are some of the most important parts of this run of The Thing, are completely missing from Marvel Unlimited, the app where you can read all of Marvel's comics, basically. If anyone knows anyone at Marvel, or if you guys just want to help me campaign to get those parts into the storyline so it can be read properly in full, please let me know if this is something that at all interests you. Marvel has shown a lot of love for professional wrestling over the years, but how did pro wrestling return the favor? Well, does the name Arachna Man ring any bells? The Armstrong family is an important family in Southern wrestling, but unfortunately not very talked about outside of one of the patriarch Bullet Bob Armstrong's sons, later becoming the Road Dogg Jesse James. One of his other sons really had a shot at becoming a huge star and an incredibly talented in-ring performer, Brad Armstrong. Working for WCW in 1991, he was unfortunately in a perpetual stasis period. Not a perfect comparison, but he was kind of the Dolph Ziggler of his day. He's definitely talented, just doesn't quite wow you enough to be a main eventer. At the same time in Marvel Comics, Spider-Man was being written by Todd McFarlane, creator of Spawn, and was actually doing incredibly well with the Spider-Man #1 selling 2.5 million copies. He was already one of the most popular superheroes of all time and had been in the hearts and minds of children everywhere for 30 years at that point. Back in WCW, the Dangerous Alliance was at peak popularity. Sting and Ric Flair were two of the biggest wrestling stars in the world. Cactus Jack, Stunning Steve Austin, and many more were getting their first taste of being on a national television. Brad was unfortunately just totally lost in the shuffle, completely without direction. A pretty common practice in wrestling, promoters and bookers will come up with an idea and test it with talented journeymen. This had actually already happened with our man Brad Armstrong, who at this point had already used the gimmicks Bad Street and teamed up with Michael P.S. Hayes, and the Candyman, where he gave candy to his fans. WCW took another chance and decided to throw a now infamous suit of superhero clothing on the second-generation performer. Billing in from Web City, he became Arachna Man. What's funny about the Arachna Man character is that absolutely nothing special really happened to him in WCW. He had two forgettable bouts with Cactus Jack and Stunning Steve Austin, both of which he lost, and several matches where he would struggle to beat no-name talent, and then finally hit a roll-up pin for the win. It's honestly jarring how boring something could be with such a ridiculous idea. Outside of having one of the most absurd wrestling attires of any wrestler who ever lived, the Arachna Man character would probably have faded into complete obscurity, if not for Marvel Comics threatening legal action and WCW being forced to wash their hands of the abhorrent Arachna Man. Brad Armstrong really wasn't damaged by the whole situation, even going on to win an early version of the WCW Cruiserweight Championship almost immediately. This would be the end of Arachna Man in WCW, ultimately. Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby, and other Marvel writers and artists clearly have a fondness of professional wrestling. All-time legend Tiger Mask would start off as a marketing stunt, with a popular anime of the same name putting a talented wrestler under the mask of their character and the fans reacting very kindly. The rest of that is history. If WCW had simply contacted Marvel about the concept, I'm certain I'd be telling you a very different story. In fact, I can prove it. Much like in the Silver Age of comics that birthed him, Spider-Man and Marvel Comics would go on to have a relationship with professional wrestling. 10 years after the death of the Arachna Man character, the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man film would come out in theaters with the iconic Bonesaw McGraw scene, starring Macho Man Randy Savage. Bonesaw McGraw would also be the boss battle in the optional tutorial of the Spider-Man movie video game, not voiced by Randy Savage, however. Randy Savage would actually reference his most iconic film role in his rap album Be a Man in the title track in his own words, calling it a starring role. When the Ultimate Spider-Man comics began, a character actually named Arachna Man would be introduced, who was an actor starring in a movie that was just an unlicensed ripoff of Spider-Man. Spider-Man himself would show up and give them a complete dressing down. Interesting to do commentary on a controversy that at the time was over 12 years old. Arachna Man would not really make any kind of return outside of being an unlockable costume in the Ultimate Spider-Man video game. Our story ultimately ends with an unexpected twist. This would be what I was referring to when I said I can prove it. Marvel Comics was putting out a line of toys where their characters were dressed as masked luchadors, and Marvel would go as far as to allow lucha versions of their characters to appear in matches for AAA Lucha Libre, which still goes on to this day. Before we go any further, I would like to add that our episode today has not at all been any kind of takedown of Brad Armstrong as a person. As a matter of fact, I would like to add that when he passed away, Jim Ross would go to his funeral and say that he was one of the most talented wrestlers he'd ever met and referred to him as one of the most underrated of an entire generation. Truly, a lot of people loved him, and it's just a shame that his career never really went anywhere given the talent that so many of his peers saw in him. What an incredible journey we went on today. Marvel writing a long love letter to the wrestling industry only for wrestling to spit in its face and in an epic heel turn, but for the industry as a whole to turn face and form the most ultimate tag team / Justice League between my two great passions in life. I bet you're all wondering why I only made mere mention of Gregory Shane Helm's iconic persona throughout this video. Well, that's because this will be a story for another day. Thank you everyone for checking out the first episode of Cheap Pop Culture. I had an absolute pleasure working for one of the first videos for the Hawk and Friends channel, and thank you a lot to Marky D123 for giving me the opportunity to do this kind of thing. I really hope this goes well so I could do videos like this every week. I really had a great time. Please subscribe, give the video a like and comment so we can gain YouTube's algorithm and get all kinds of new videos on the weird crossovers between wrestling and pop culture. And who knows, maybe I'll try other projects on this channel down the line. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.